Inhofe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, in my work on this committee and having chaired the committee for a number of years, it's not difficult to understand, to come to the conclusion that a lot of these costly and outrageous rules are about one thing and one thing only, and that's control, and primarily federal control. I've looked at some of the regulations that this administration has done away with, and I tie that directly to the success, economic success, the EGDP that's coming in and jumping up from 1.5% a year to over 3% a year, and good things are happening. One of the regulations that I was trying to do away with, this was a year ago, was the first one that this president was successful in doing away with the congressional review process, was a rule that was put in by the previous administration that said that if you're a domestic oil or gas company and you're competing with China or someone else, you have to give them all of the playbook that you're using, actually putting them at a disadvantage over our opposition overseas. Now, it was easy to draw up a CRA and pass it. It did pass. We had a signing ceremony, but you know, the fact that we have all these regulations out there is just, it's really pretty outrageous. Mr. Duvall, you mentioned in your opening statement, you talked about the WOTUS bill. Now, I know that when I went around my state of Oklahoma before, you took a position, and most of the other organizations took the same position, that are representing farmers, that in my area of Oklahoma, in western Oklahoma, it's very arid. And those people out there, of all the regulations that were put in by the previous administration, that was the #1 regulation. And that ended up being the #1 regulation also from the American Farm Bureau and other organizations. So I would just ask you if there's anything that you didn't say about that particular regulation that would either be costly, how it would be costly, or inconvenient and have a negative effect.
Yes, sir. If you start looking at some of the conservation practices that we put on the ground to protect our soil and water on our farms, and you start transitioning land from one use to another, not commercial to agriculture, but one agricultural practice to another, there are unbelievable permitting procedures that certain areas of the country or the country has to go through to get that, to be able to do that.
Are you familiar with the panhandle of Oklahoma?
Not really. I'm coming to the panhandle of Oklahoma, though.
Yeah, that was what their concern was. After a rain, that could all of a sudden be considered to be a wetland.
Yes, sir.
And all of a sudden you lose the state jurisdiction and the federal jurisdiction takes over. Was that one of the? Do you see that consistently around the country?
I see it consistently, and also I see a variance of determination between agencies of what really is a wetland, what's not.
That's exactly right.
And it's unclear to farmers how they can perceive what their land really is.
Well, I appreciate that very much, because that certainly is true. Mr. Hanson, I'm going to do this real quickly here because you probably are familiar with what we tried to do with the lesser prairie chicken and the ESA. We had 5 states, Oklahoma, Texas, Kansas, New Mexico, and Colorado, that got together and they determined what they could do and what kind of reform that they could have, and everyone agreed it was near perfect. It was everyone deciding at home what the solution was. Now, do you sometimes wonder if we go through all that trouble through the private sector, the landowners, and the landowners we know are the ones who are most concerned about the endangered species, about their own farms and taking care of environmental problems, why it is that you look at others doing that and government just doesn't seem to put much weight behind that. I'm talking about local suggestions, local programs that are working. You ever thought about that, Mr. Hanson?
All the time, Senator. It's very frustrating to working on trying to find a solution to an issue that's identified on the land and then have the rug pulled out from under you. In the situation you addressed, the Fish and Wildlife Service was privy to all the conversations, all the negotiation, the plan that was built. They knew what was coming. They agreed to it and then pulled the rug out from under those operations.
That's exactly what happened. And by the way, Fish and Wildlife did agree, and they also agree that the best stewards of the land are the landowners themselves. So they need to be listened to also.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Inhofe. Senator